Hello, everybody. My name is Matthew Slaats. At the moment, I'm a PhD student at the University of Virginia in urban planning. And I've been kind of a community organizer and activist on a lot of different things, but mostly about focusing on community decision making and community development work, both here in Central Virginia, but also north of New York City for several years. Really focusing on like how do decisions get made, not by a small group of people, but by communities about the future of their cities. So I've come today to talk a little bit about the experience and remember all that's happened since 2016, when many of you know a group of white supremacists and fascists and Nazis descended on Charlottesville in regards to several statues that the city was trying to remove of historical Confederate Civil War figures that have long been kind of a part of a lost cause narrative that permeates the southern US. So it brings up some really interesting conversations about these ideas that I've been thinking a lot about, and I need to write about more. It's even hard to talk about it because part of that history is not my own history. It's a history of our community, and it's an event that is interesting because it had this massive trauma that kind of went around the world and was reinforced and amplified by the president of the United States not actually taking it seriously and actually supporting a conversation that actually resonated within the white supremacists that were here, that came here. So by 2016, actually go back earlier in like 2014 and 2013, there's long been an effort to kind of remove these statues. The primary one was of Confederate General Robert E. Lee, which stood in this really prominent space in downtown Charlottesville. And that monument was created back in the 1920s and 30s by a wealthy gentleman that was from Charlottesville. And he erected a bunch of different statues around the city that kind of, again, supported this narrative, this white Southern narrative that harkens back to this Civil War time. And it was in like 2013, 2014 that a young teenager, a high school student, her name was Ziana Bryant, put forward a petition to remove the statues. Like she brought forth an understanding of like what those statues meant and how they impacted her life. I mean, it was a direct response. And that then led to a series of city-led conversations and a blue ribbon panel about removing these statues, which is not so simple because the statues are actually reinforced by state law. So the state of Virginia had a law that basically protected Civil War Confederate statues. Even if cities wanted to remove them, they couldn't. So several years of panels and conversations about like the historical importance of these, the desire to reinterpret them. But that led to a lot of protests. You know, when you connect that with George Floyd's death, you know, the rise of the Black Lives Matters movement, there was kind of a conversation that was going on, and I think it led to a lot of people realizing and kind of building a consciousness about the reality of these statues, especially as a white male myself, right? Like it's easy for me to kind of overlook the power that they hold in the community, and the way they impact, you know, any person of color who lives in the city, as they hover over all of us. And so that led to a lot of really amazing activism and direct action, protests, you know, showing up at city council meetings. And I would say I'm not the most active, like person out in the front line doing the most present activism. I'm more of kind of a background organizer, doing projects like participatory budgeting and community organizing, and kind of doing that cultural organizing. It's about like building community resilience. But a lot of people kind of came together around the statues. They were a lightning rod, and people, even though they may have said, let's keep them at first, as people's consciousness grew about them, what they meant to various people, a stronger and stronger desire came to remove them. And so after 2016 or after 2017, August 11th and 12th, and the protests that emerged out, and the death of a young woman, and the impact and the violence that came forward from that, which was a very real, tangible thing. Like, the people that were hurt were people that we knew. It wasn't, it was a deep trauma, a trauma that like sat with us. And I know for over a year, I think we were all just kind of thinking about it, kind of ruminating on it, like holding it in ways that that was very hard and very difficult. And I think that the efforts, to remove the statues, which finally did happen just this year, they were finally pulled away by a crane after the state government approved their removal. But I think the interesting thing about them is, now that they're gone, and I think this is where the community economies research kind of comes in, is they've been such a lightning rod, such a focal point. Now that they're removed, what goes on? There's amazing efforts by local organizers and historians and community organizers to do work that takes those statues and melts them down and turns them into something else, turns them into some positive force within the community. So that organizing, that direct action, that continued like hard work of making our vision for the future of the city is a thing that continues to move forward. But I think what's interesting is that, and this was one of my problems early on, is that there's symbols, there are pieces of artwork, and having been an artist, like I recognize the importance that symbols have in society, in our society, and how they can be very powerful for eliciting emotions and reinforcing ideas. But there's symbols that support an underlying structure that I don't think we really understood or wanted to take into conversation. And so the community economies, in some ways, like allows us to have that conversation, which I think is interesting. But the question are people really prepared to have that conversation? So a lot of what's happened now that the statues are gone is kind of this questioning about the meaning of them. And I think a lot about this, a quote that a writer, author, Robin D.G. Kelly talks about in his book, Freedom Dreams, about how easy it is to be against something, but it's more difficult to be for something. And so that it's easy to identify something like a statue and fight against it. It's tangible, it's physical, it's in your environment in ways, and you can put pressure on seeing it go away. But the question is, like, what are we really for? And I think that's where this kind of conversation about community economies is important, because I think that's what's starting to happen now. Like, now that the statues are gone, people are starting to think, what it is that supported them, what it made them a reality. And in a lot of ways, it's our economic system. It's our lack of affordable housing. It's a city that's being gentrified, and Black communities are being removed from Charlottesville, and that's a long history. It's thinking about where is wealth held and stored, who has access to it, how do we really respond to those community needs, like for vital like food and health and whatnot. So in a lot of ways, community economies kind of starts to unpack and open up the possibilities of considering those things. And you have this layering of the COVID crisis over the last year, which I think has brought forward interesting histories of mutual aid, which have been here for over a decade, or over a century, I should say, and now become real again. Black-led and like community focused efforts to overcome risk and to remain resilient that were taking place after the Civil War, all of a sudden are kind of come forward again and can become real. And mutual aid is now a term that is talked about and thought about and acted upon in different ways and manifested. So I think that in a society where the economy is a very abstract idea, it's an idea that people don't feel they are a part of. Traditional neoclassical economics like removes us from that. It's meant to remove us from that. And so this recognition that no, like my actions are a part of that economic practice, and that has power, which is something that a group of us are working on as we develop a solidarity economy network throughout the state. So not just in Charlottesville. And so I really see these moments of direct action, kind of creating the consciousness, creating the recognition, creating the desire, creating the need. And then when you layer on these other crises that have happened in the last several years, people are awakening to the fact that, our economic system doesn't have to be the way it is. And so what is it really going to take to realize that other system, and what values should that system hold? And how do we create an ecosystem to push that forward? So that's a major piece of what is actually happening now. And for me, the performativity, the opening up of the economic system, that there's multiple ways that's happening, is allowing us to realize that there's actually a lot of work actually going on, and has been going on for a long time. So we're really looking back at the past, starting with Black and Indigenous economic innovation that took place, in the early part of the 20th century, and using that as our foundation. But then in building on that and thinking about like, how do we write the long-term disinvestment and disenfranchisement that's been taking place in Virginia, a state that holds a law called the right to work, but it actually doesn't mean the right. It's about containing labor and holding labor back. A state that values being open for business, but the question is like, what type of business, which is primarily corporate global business. It's about extraction and domination. So a lot of what our Solidarity Economy Network is starting to think about is like, how do we both engage in building the capital, building the economic system, building the political system, building the legal system up that needs to be created to imagine another economy that's one about resilience and support. I would say that the direct action created the kind of the zeitgeist, the desire, the awareness, the consciousness of that possibility, and now we're starting to kind of build that action and move forward with it in the coming years. And it's a big idea. So it's been hard to kind of focus, but I think there's an understanding that there's a lot taking place, and how do we support that moving forward in the coming years, and let that be the center of the work that's taking place. Thanks.